more people come than originally anticipated, which shows all of us that this is a very important topic that will be addressed tonight. So I'll wait one more minute until everybody has a seat. Looks like we're doing okay, inshallah. So first and foremost, assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much to all of you for coming out on a Friday evening. In Chicagoland, that's a big deal. Most people have social engagements and family and lots of stuff going on. But you've taken the time out of your busy schedules to learn about the crisis that the Rohingya Muslims are going through. And this program was really put together through the efforts of Maria Muzaffar. So please make a dua for her. It is her hard work that brought this program to fruition, and we'd also like to thank the Islamic Foundation for hosting, and of course our speakers who I will be introducing. First, we will begin with our local attorney, Amina Saeed. Most of you may have heard of her name. She's an attorney who's been involved in the Chicagoland community for many years. She works with CIOGC and the Muslim Bar Association, and she has a very personal connection to the Rohingya tragedy, which she's going to share with us. So if you could give Amina your attention, she has a compelling story to share.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, the Rohingya are in such a remote part of the world that it's difficult for many Americans to prioritize them. I'm about to share something with you that I wrote for people who know me, because my hope was that associating a familiar face with the Rohingya tragedy will help bring it home, so to speak, for people. So even if you don't know me, though, I hope that my essay speaks to you in some way today. I wasn't born in Burma, I've never stepped foot there, and I don't have any Burmese blood in me. But my family identity is linked with Burma forever because my mother and her entire extended family lived there as immigrants for over a generation until they were forced to flee. Let me take you back to the 1800s, during the British era. Many Indians migrated to Burma for better economic opportunities. Since the British ruled most of the subcontinent, or if not all the subcontinent, and neighboring areas, travel between India and Burma was considered legal back then, as long as you were considered a citizen of the British Empire, which many of my family members were. I've actually held passports saying citizen of the British Empire, and it's a pretty humbling thing. Being savvy Gujarati Indian businessmen that they were, my great-grandfather, his brothers, and many of their friends, Muslims and Hindus, took advantage of the business opportunities in Burma, which was relatively undeveloped at the time. They soon moved their entire families to Rangoon, and a whole generation was born and raised in Burma of my family. Their businesses flourished, and they developed the Burmese economy for all practical purposes. They were huge philanthropists, they built masajid throughout Burma, and they really immersed themselves in the local culture. And I can share with you that amongst my family's holdings in Burma were a textile mill, a dinnerware factory, and a hardware factory. They employed a lot of Burmese people, gave them jobs. But no matter what they did, unfortunately, the Indians were never completely accepted, and there was always resentment that they had come to Burma. And then at one point, World War II happened. Most Americans don't know this because it's not really pertinent to American history, but 7 days after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, it launched the first of many strikes against Burma. The intent was to scare the British, because the Japanese wanted the British out of Burma. They wanted Burma for themselves. The Bamar people, who are the ethnic majority in Burma, resented the British and the Indians. So they sided with the Japanese for the rest of the war. Then when the British began to retreat from Burma, Indian immigrants realized that their days were also numbered. Many Indians fled with whatever they could carry on their backs, including many of my relatives. Those who could afford it traveled by horse carriage or donkey cart, but those who couldn't afford that traveled by foot. They had to go through the jungles, they had to fight off wild animals, cross mountains to get to India. Many died of typhoid on the way. But this is important because their route was almost the same as the route chosen by many of the Rohingya today and for the last few years. And remember that there were landmines laid out during World War II. There were trenches and other dangerous parts of the war that affected that route. And those things are still there along the way, and they're affecting the Rohingya crossing. It's estimated that about 400,000 Indians fled Burma during World War II and immediately after. Unfortunately, their stories were never really put in writing, so we don't have that preserved. So after the war, my family still yearned for their beloved Burma, even after the dangerous escape they had gone through. So many of them returned to their homes and businesses in Burma after the war. But unfortunately, things were never really the same again for them. They were eventually forced to flee for good in the 1960s. The military ruled Burma ruthlessly and made their dislike of Indians pretty openly known. They nationalized Indian businesses and confiscated all currency. Indians were arrested, some were never seen again. Beatings became common. My mother's family had to make a difficult choice: either return to India or risk persecution. So along with all their business properties, they left behind all their beautiful homes, all the fancy imported European furniture that I've heard so much about over the years, and their jewelry. They left it all behind and they fled. Despite the fear they lived with in Burma, my mother and her family have always missed it. My generation has grown up hearing so many stories about how beautiful life was in Burma for Indians. Some of my cousins and I have a running joke that if there's ever a place that's like heaven on earth, Burma must be it, from everything that we've heard about its natural beauty. Even though I've never been there, I feel like a sense of familiarity with it just because I've heard so much about it. From the streets of Rangoon to the northern city of Mandalay, the pagodas of Krom, and the Irrawaddy River. You know, my aunts, uncles, my mom, they all talk about it. And popular Burmese foods were part of my childhood. Yet, even though they love their adopted home so much, my whole family is thankful that they were able to flee Burma, because they know that if they had stayed, they probably would have been jailed and tortured by the Burmese military. And then after that, they would have lived as second-class, unwanted immigrants, stripped of their wealth, and subjected to the whims of the military and communist rulers. So thankfully, they had the connections and they had the financial resources to escape persecution. And because they'd already been through this once before in Burma, they had already established homes and businesses in India and Pakistan by the 60s. So they were able to get away and still not have to rebuild from scratch. Otherwise, our family story would be very different if they had remained in Burma. And I certainly don't think I would be practicing law in America today if they had stayed in Burma. And similarly, Many of my aunts, my uncles, cousins wouldn't be who they are. They're physicians, dentists, a world-renowned scientists, lawyers, engineers, accountants, software developers, authors, business consultants, professors, and other professionals. Collectively, we all serve communities throughout the United States, the United Kingdom, and all over the world, pretty much. And on this list is also my first cousin, Nasima, who is a Columbia Business School graduate. Her journey began in this world in 1964 in Burma and ended abruptly on that fateful September day 16 years ago in New York, where she worked as an equity analyst at the World Trade Center. Nasima was born Burmese, but died a proud American. She was witty, incredibly intelligent, and a mountain climber who had just returned from climbing the Rocky Mountains in the Canadian Rockies a few days before 9/11 happened. And our family is not alone, though, in this experience. I personally know of several other prominent Gujarati Indian families who fled Burma. But the reason I bring that up is to ask you to consider that many of them remain silent about the current genocide out of fear for family members who still live in Burma. My family still has people who live there, people who chose to not leave because they were optimistic and thought things would get better, but they didn't. So, but the truth is, none of us who have become successful and important members of the communities that we live in, none of us would be here or be the professionals that we are today if our parents and our grandparents had not fled from Burma. The Rohingya people are facing much worse persecution, unfortunately. And they don't have the financial means and they don't have the connections that my family and other Gujarati Indian families did. And unlike my family, they're not immigrants who can go back to where they came from. Burma is the only home they have ever known. And in that regard, they're more like Native Americans or Australian Aborigines. They have the same right to the land that they live in as their oppressors do. The waters off the coast of northern Burma are very rough and choppy. Alligators lurk in the marshes, but the alternative is rape, concentration camps, and death by gruesome torture. So the Rohingya have no choice. They are turning to the sea. Our advocacy, and I say our meaning collectively, all of us in the Muslim community and through our efforts, the American people as a whole, our advocacy and financial contributions can make the difference between their survival and their torturous death. If anybody's seen the movie Schindler's List, Oskar Schindler gave everything he owned to save as many Polish Jews as he could from the horrors of Auschwitz, right? And after the Holocaust, what did the free world say? The free world said, never again. But never again is happening as we speak. I'm not asking you to give up everything you own like Oskar Schindler did, but whatever you can spare will help save one or more lives. And who knows? The life you may save may be a future doctor, engineer, or scientist who, like my family, can make a positive contribution to our world. So, that's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you for listening. My mom is here today. She's right there in the front. She loves to talk about Burma and her childhood in Burma. So if anyone is interested in hearing stories, please feel free to talk to her. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amina, for those heartfelt words. As we all can see, this is not a tragedy that is happening just around the world. It affects people very close to our homes. Our guest speaker, our keynote speaker tonight, we're very honored to have him. His name is Dr. Azim Ibrahim, and he is a research professor at the Strategic Studies Institute, U.S. Army War College, and member of the board of directors at the International Center for the Study of Radicalization and Political Violence at King's College, London University. He received his PhD from the University of Cambridge, has previously been appointed as an International Security Fellow at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University and a World Fellow at Yale University. Over the years, Dr. Ibrahim has advised numerous world leaders on policy development, and in his most recent roles, he served as the National Security and Defense Policy Advisor to the leader of the UK Labour Party, Right Honourable Ed Miliband MP, and the Shadow Cabinet from 2012 to 2015, and as Strategic Policy Advisor to the Chairman of Pakistan's PTI party, Imran Khan. Outside academia, Dr. Ibrahim has been a reservist in the 4th Battalion Parachute Regiment, UK's elite airborne infantry reserve, and a multi-award-winning entrepreneur. He was ranked as a top 100 global thinker by the European Social Think Tank in 2010 and named a young global leader by the World Economic Forum. We are honored to have Dr. Ibrahim with us today.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you so much for those kind words. I'm going to speak from here because I have to change the slides. I'm aware not everybody can see me. But before I start, I want to give my sincere thanks to Maria Muzaffar and CIOGC and also for Islamic Foundation for hosting us here today. I'm going to just talk a little bit about the history of Myanmar and the Rohingyas and how we got to where we are today. So I'm going to start off, first of all, with a historical quote. Naturally, the common people don't want war, but it's the leaders of the country that determine policy. And it's always a simple thing to take the people along with you. All you have to do is tell them that you are being attacked, and it works the same in every country. Now, these are the words of Field Marshal Hermann Göring, Hitler's Vice-Chancellor. Now, when we see these words today, it feels like the echoes of an era, a bygone era, that we feel that we have left behind. But how would we react to these kinds of words today? Now imagine we started hearing reports of a mid-sized European country where there's tensions between the majority Christian population and a minority that lives within its borders. And just like the Jews in the 1930s, this minority is different. They have a different skin colour, they have different features, they have a different language, and they have a different religion. First of all, the reports start with discrimination. Bus stations refusing to sell them tickets, boycotts of their businesses. But then the reports become more and more sinister. These people are already undereducated. Then they're barred from schools, and then they're barred from hospitals. Then they're barred from standing for elections, and then they're barred from even voting. And there's some people that start to say that only Christians in this country can be loyal citizens, and everybody else is disloyal. And then others start to say, well, these people, they were never citizens in the first place. They're all illegal interlopers from another country. And this narrative starts to harden into conventional wisdom, and it begins to get accepted. And then even the diplomats of this country start to say that these people, they're actually inferior to the rest of us. These people are underrepresented internationally, so the voice is barely heard and the story is hardly told. Then the regional government starts to detain them in permanent internment camps and doesn't allow them to work. Then the religious extremists in this country start to incite violence against them, and that is when the pogroms start, the massacres. Imagine that this country had an autocratic military dictatorship, and there's hope for political change, and that change lies in a great leader who'll soon be out of prison and who will lead this country into the light. And there's cheers from all over the world when this great leader is released, yes, at last the Democrats have won. At last there's going to be change. Everything's going to be better. And then there's nothing. The discrimination and the violence continues as it always has. And any hope that there will be change is now long gone. Now, if this was a European country, we would all shake our heads. We would lobby our representatives. There would be speeches in Parliament, in Congress. Journalists would write difficult stories and ask difficult questions. There would be protests and statements everywhere. But this is happening today. It's not happening in Europe. Of course, it's happening in Myanmar. And I just want to first of all tell you how I managed to get into all of this. I first heard of the Rohingya about 4 or 5 years ago. I knew they were a persecuted minority, and I knew there wasn't really much information out there about them. When I tried to find out more, there was practically nothing, no information about them. So I wrote a number of op-ed pieces in various publications trying to highlight their cause and their struggle. And then made a trip out to Myanmar and to Bangladesh to see the camps for myself. I first went to Bangladesh, and these are pictures from some of the pictures I took from the camps in Bangladesh. And the conditions there are subhuman. I've been to refugee camps all over the world. The conditions here are no more better than the camps actually over the border in Myanmar itself. This is in Bangladesh, where there's literally hundreds of thousands of Rohingya refugees. This was 2 years ago, so this is before the current crisis. Over 400,000 refugees crammed into one very small area. And this is in Myanmar. This is my second trip into Myanmar. This, for example, is a Rohingya village that has been completely emptied. It's been completely emptied of people. I was smuggled into the camps by bribing the guards. My fixer arranged that for me. And these are some of the conditions in the camp. It's monsoon area, so it rains all the time. And you're knee-high in garbage and human waste. And this is the kind of inside of where the people actually have to live. And you can see the waste, garbage, is just everywhere. This was my fixer. And his camp is constantly patrolled by border guards, the security forces, to ensure that nobody gets in and out. These sites of mass graves. This, for example, was a family of 7 that was burned alive, and what the Myanmar security officials did is just literally pile the bodies in the camp outside, and the camp residents took them in and buried them. So how did we get to this situation? How did this tension rise, and where did it all come from? So for this, we need to take a step back in history and look at where all of this came from. Myanmar is a country of about 51 million people that's sandwiched between China, Laos, Thailand and Bangladesh. It has trading links with India, which is what brought Islam to the region. Buddhism arrived about 800 AD, and much of the history has been multi-confessional, with Hindu, Buddhist and Muslims all living together side by side. Today it's about 80% Buddhist, 8% Christian and 4% Muslims. And then there's Muslims and the rest. And the Rohingya minority is approximately 1.2 to 2 million. There's no exact figure in terms of how many there actually are, and they all live in the northern Rakhine district. And some historians trace their roots back of approximately 3,000 years. Within Myanmar itself, they are the largest ethnic minority. As I said, they look different, they have darker skins and they have different features, but they are today what they've always been: manual labourers, fishermen or farmers. Now the main accusation that is made against the Rohingya is this here, that this term Rohingya is a manufactured term. Now some of them, the Myanmar officials, they would say that this term was manufactured in 1942. They put a date on it. This term was manufactured in March 1942, and before that time, this term did not exist. There's no record of it. These people are all illegal immigrants that came over from Bangladesh just before the Second World War, and they created this term Rohingya to give themselves an identity. And they're all illegal interlopers, and they should all go back to Bangladesh. So this is the main accusation, this is the crux of the entire accusation, the problem against them. So one of the things I try to do in my book is try to examine this, try to examine the veracity of this accusation. And it turns out that the term Rohingya is actually, in recorded history, goes back as far as 1799, when an explorer called Francis Buchanan referred to them as people in Arakan. 12 years later, in the classical journal, they're also referred to as the Rohingya. In 1815, and you can see it here, Rohingya. But the main document that I found, I dug up from the Indian National Archives in New Delhi, when the British ruled Burma. One thing the British were very effective at is keeping records. The British were master administrators. So this was a survey that was done by a British civil servant, Charles Patton, who in 1826 wrote this study, which I got from the archives in New Delhi. And it clearly states in this document, you can see on the left-hand side is the original, and on the right-hand side is a more eligible version. But clearly states that 3 in 10 souls are Muslim Sardars of Rohingya origin. So this idea that this term is being created, and these people are all illegally from Bangladesh, does not stand up to historical scrutiny. So where did all this animosity come from? Clearly, the historical evidence is there. It's documented. This has been peer-reviewed. So, but where does all this animosity against the Rohingya actually come from? For that, we have to look at when the Japanese invaded Myanmar. What was that time, Burma? The Burmese nationalists, the Buddhist majority, sided with the Japanese invaders, thinking that the Japanese are going to be victorious, and this is going to lead to swifter independence. The Rohingya minority stayed loyal to the British colonial masters. So when the British were victorious, there was bad blood between the two people. But despite that, when the country did become independent in 1948, there was relative calm when they had a democratic transition for the next few decades. That is up until 1962, when there was a military coup by this individual here, General Ne Win. And he tried to implement what he called the Burmese Road to Socialism, which was a communist manifesto. It was an economic disaster. So he did what a lot of military dictators in that situation do, is that they try to find a scapegoat to blame all of the ills of society on. And the Rohingya minority, who were already seen with suspicion, were the minority of choice for this blame. He did what we see a lot of military dictators do in the Middle East now when things go wrong, is that they don the cloak of religiosity. They start becoming more religious. We've seen that with Saddam and Anwar Sadat and others, is that they start going to the mosque and so on. And he was exactly the same. He started to become much more overtly Buddhist. He started practicing Buddhism more. He started funding monasteries, funding clergy, funding organizations. Then he started saying that only Buddhists can be loyal citizens of this country, and everybody else is unloyal, is seen with suspicion. Then he passed a number of laws, including the 1974 Nationality Act, and then eventually the 1982 Citizenship Law. And this is the basis of today, the problem that the Rohingya are facing. 1982, they were all stripped of their nationality and they were made stateless overnight. And they started repeating the lie that there have never been any Rohingya in this country in history. And this lie is now accepted as being conventional wisdom. But in 1988, there was a popular revolt that forced Ne Win to stand down. The general had to stand down, but his regime stayed intact and stayed in power. And then there was Aung San Suu Kyi. When she came to power, when she was released from prison in 2015, she won the election overwhelmingly against the military. But despite that, the military still wields considerable influence. They still control a quarter of the seats in Parliament. They still control the major ministries, the Interior Ministry, the Foreign Ministry, etc. But when Aung San Suu Kyi came to power, nothing changed for the Rohingya. This is when in 2012, 2013, we started to see the first massacres and the waves of refugee crisis. And this really is a story of untold brutality. One of the main culprits behind this was this man here, who's on the front page of Time magazine, who refers to himself, his name is Ashin Gurathil, a Buddhist monk. He refers to himself as the Buddhist Bin Laden. I have watched some of his speeches. Now, one of the questions I get asked most often is, Buddhism, Buddhists killing people? Surely they're amongst the most peaceful people that you'll ever come across. These are people that even when they have bad thoughts, you need to cleanse yourself. But you need to understand that the Buddhism that they follow is not the Buddhism that you and I may be familiar with. It is not the Buddhism of the Dalai Lama. They do not even recognize the Dalai Lama. They follow a form of Buddhism called Theravada Buddhism, which is essentially Buddhist supremacy. Buddhist supremacy, and they believe that all other religions, all other ideologies have to be kept in check, have to be suppressed for Buddhism to thrive. And they also believe that the Rohingyas have been reincarnated from snakes and insects. So when you're actually killing them, you're not killing normal human beings, you're just killing vermin. This is another individual. One of the questions I asked when I was visiting there is, who are the main people instigating the violence? And this person's name came up almost in every conversation. Dr. A. Mong, the leader of the Arakan National Party. So I wrote a number of pieces, articles against him. And after the massacres, there was essentially the wave after wave of refugees. This is just a photo of one of the camps. Over 100,000 people in this camp, 140,000 people in this camp. Hospitals refusing to treat them, very little medical attention. And if the people try to flee out of those camps, out to those concentration camps, they have to do so in rickety boats, and then they become the victims of people smugglers who then sell them on to the prawn slavery trade in Thailand. In the first 6 months in 2015, for example, 31,000 Rohingya fled in this kind of situation. And the UNHCR estimated that from 2012 to 2013, 13,000 arrived in Malaysia and 6,000 in Thailand. And Thai officials in Thailand have been complicit in collecting Rohingyas from traffickers and selling them on to the prawn trade. One of the individuals I met told me, he said, they told me I was going to work in a pineapple factory, but when I saw the fishing boat, I realised I had been sold. I was so depressed, I wanted to die. There have been moves to help them. The Indonesian Navy has agreed to help boats that have become stranded, and Myanmar has tried to close the border to stop the boats from leaving. But neither get to the root of the problem, which is the citizenship of the Rohingya. So this brings me to last year. Aung San Suu Kyi, when she came to power, she set up a number of commissions to investigate this problem. The Rohingya have been described by the UN as the most persecuted minority in the world. So there was a lot of pressure on this new democratic leader to do something about this. And so what she did, she set up a number of commissions to examine the persecution of the Rohingya, to get to the bottom of the problem, and then try to implement those recommendations. So she commissioned, for example, Kofi Annan, one of the world's leading and most respected diplomats, to examine this problem. And he was commissioned, he reported, he did his investigation, and I was fortunate enough to go and meet with him and advise him at the early stages. But the interesting thing about setting up these commissions is that 2 weeks after Aung San Suu Kyi set up those commissions, she made a trip to the United States in which she addressed the UN General Assembly, and she was lauded as this new great leader who has brought Myanmar out from the cold, out of military dictatorship and into the light of the international community. Then she had a visit to President Obama in the White House, where President Obama unilaterally lifted all sanctions of Myanmar, removing all leverage that they had. Now, most cynics would argue, some cynics would argue, that she only set up those commissions in order to pacify the international community, to say, well, I'm doing what I can, I'm trying to get to the root of this problem, and as soon as these commissions have made the recommendations, I'll implement them, and everything will be much better. And she managed to get all sanctions lifted of Myanmar. But the interesting thing is that while she was in the United States, Obama was not the only person she met. She also met with Senator Bob Corker, who was the leader of the US Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and his interpretation of meeting her was very different. He said that after witnessing her lack of regard of Burma's dismal track record, he was absolutely appalled and had complete indifference to the suffering, not only of the Rohingya, but of all minorities in Myanmar. This brings us forward to October 2009, when 3 border posts were attacked that left 9 security officials dead. An organisation called the Rohingya Solidarity Organisation claimed responsibility for it. This organisation here. This resulted in a lockdown of the entire Rohingya population, which was essentially an excuse to restrict their movement and even further, and this resulted in violence. Remember, this was in 2016, before the current crisis. Human Rights Watch obtained satellite imagery which showed 430 buildings in 3 villages were completely burnt to the ground. So this is a before picture, and this is the after picture. This is the before for another village. This is Wapiek village, and this is after, leaving 200 people dead in this village and another 100,000 Rohingya displaced. This is the village you can see after complete and utter destruction. Yes, when President Obama got elected, Ashwin Wirathu gave a statement that Donald Trump is very similar to me. He wants to tackle Muslims and stop Muslims from entering the country. He's exactly what we were trying to do. And in fact, the gentleman I mentioned earlier, Dr. A. Mong, the leader of the Arakan National Party, he actually wrote a letter to Donald Trump saying that I congratulate you and I look forward to working with you against these illegal immigrants and these Islamic interlopers. So in conclusion, the situation of the Rohingya is replete with the echoes of history. I started off with a quote from Field Marshal Hermann Göring, and it's obvious that when Rwanda happened, the entire world was aware of exactly what was going on. That many politicians after the fact tried to rewrite history, saying that we had no idea what was going on, but this is completely false. I've met people who were actually in Rwanda, I've met journalists who were there, I met with the UN leaders who were on the ground. They've all told me explicitly, everybody knew exactly what was happening in Rwanda, they knew exactly what was happening in Darfur, they knew exactly what was happening in Bosnia, but they chose to do nothing. And we are now seeing the same thing repeating itself. Everybody knows fully well exactly what is happening in Myanmar at the moment. It is not difficult, especially with today's technology. We can see villages burning from Bangladesh. There is a systematic and organised campaign to ethnically cleanse the entire Rohingya population. Up until today, the United Nations estimate that 420,000 people have crossed over the border into Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a very poor country that is simply unable to absorb those kinds of numbers. And the Bangladeshi government has issued a number of edicts to say that none of these Rohingyas will be treated as refugees. They are building new camps for them on 2,000 acres of land, 4,000 new shelters to house these Rohingyas, and they will not be permitted to blend into the local population. They'll be confined to those camps in the hope that a solution can be found and they can be sent back to Myanmar. But these people have got nowhere to go. Their villages have been completely destroyed. General Min Aung Hlaing, the Commander-in-Chief of the Myanmar Armed Forces, has come on record just 10 days ago on his Facebook page. He said very explicitly that we are now completing the business from 1942. This is unfinished business from 1942 to remove the illegal Bengalis from our country. Now, we are in an extremely difficult situation because I'm in touch with people in the camps almost on a daily basis. I'm also in touch with people at the United Nations. And it seems to me that there's going to be no action at all from the UN. I've spoken to people who have met with officials from the UN, and they have told them unequivocally that there's going to be no action. All we're going to do is wait until this is over. And when it's over, we'll try to take care of the refugees in the fallout. And this is totally unacceptable. It's totally unacceptable. By the end of this year, on the current trajectory, the entire Rohingya population will be ethnically cleansed out of Myanmar. And this is exactly what they're trying to do. Now, one of the things about Aung San Suu Kyi, one of the reasons why there's been inaction from the international community is that they believe that Aung San Suu Kyi's position is very fragile. She's a new leader, she doesn't have control over the military, which is true. She doesn't have much control over the military, but if we try to put too much pressure on her, then there might be a military coup that will lead the country to go back to military dictatorship. This is a myth that is being spread by her supporters. I wrote a piece in Newsweek this morning. It was published this morning. I urge you to have a look at it. It's based on primary source information of people that I've spoken to that know her very well. This is a myth that is being perpetuated by her supporters. There is no possibility of a military coup. The military is in a very, very good position at the moment. They're in a very good position. They're undertaking ethnic cleansing. They have the population on their side. Aung San Suu Kyi has about 80% approval ratings, 80% of the vote. She has the whole population on her side, and the military is can undertake this ethnic cleansing without any difficulty because they also have the people on their side. There's no chance of a military coup. We're in a very difficult situation. I urge everybody that has the ability to get in touch with your elected representatives, and at the same time try to do whatever you possibly can through the various organisations. I don't select anyone, but to do whatever you possibly can to assist those people in this very, very dire situation, because it seems to be they have gone from a concentration camp in Myanmar to another concentration camp in Bangladesh. They were stateless in Myanmar, and they're going to be stateless in Bangladesh with absolutely no future. The probability of them going back to Myanmar is almost nil. So these people have literally no future at all. They remain stateless and remain homeless. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Anybody has any questions? Dr.
Good. Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned about the UN and the UN leaders being aware of previous massacres, but they couldn't do much. As a citizen, what we can expect. If we start falling, there is already a game set. Even the Senate leader said that we're not going to specialize per year. 9 months leader. So, and you mentioned about the refugees. There's no way to go back to their homes. The chance is nil. So, is it a good idea for us as Muslims, those are kind of Muslims, to put more pressure on Muslim nations and the leaders to absorb the people of Myanmar, especially the Rohingyas, minority, into their country? And there is also a talk about the Indian media about Mohammed Jinnah actually, rejected the idea to include the Rohingya population when Pakistan was formed. So what is the position of PTR? You could elaborate on that.
Okay, so there's a number of questions there. First of all, in terms of trying to lobby your elected representatives, the probability of action from the international community is quite low. In terms, I do not see any sort of intervention. But having said that, there are a number of politicians in the United States, some of them quite surprising, some of them very senior Republicans, actually Trump supporters have spoken out very strongly against this. Senator Bob Corker is one of them. I've been following his work for a number of times, and he has issued a number of statements. Even in this current situation, he has issued very strong statements against the Myanmar military. So it's important we support people that are doing that. I've written to him a number of times. I've called his office just to thank him, to say, thanks so much, we support what you're doing, etc. There's also the House Foreign Relations Committee chair, whose name I can't recall, but he's actually done the same as well. There are a number of people that are in a position that can have significant influence, that are actually doing good. Now, I don't believe there's going to be much intervention at this moment. However, that does not mean we do nothing at all. Situations like Rwanda, Bosnia, Darfur, all of them, there was non-intervention in all of them, but many years afterwards, we've seen tribunals being set up. We've seen tribunals being set up, war crimes tribunals, etc. And those people that were responsible for those genocides were brought to justice. We've seen that in Bosnia and in Rwanda, it's still going on. So we have to make sure that we lay the groundwork for that. So if nothing is done at the moment, then we lay the groundwork that those people that are perpetuating this violence do not get away with it. Yeah. So the second part of your question in terms of Muslim countries absorbing, the government of Bangladesh on the 1990s has an official policy of not allowing any Rohingya into their country. Yeah. Now, so many people see that, well, that's why is a Muslim country treating their fellow Muslim brethren and refugees in such a fashion. But this is actually the correct policy for Bangladesh to have. It is not the responsibility of Bangladesh to take in citizens of another country. And this is precisely what the government of Myanmar wants. They want all the Rohingya to leave and go to a third country. But the Rohingya themselves, they are citizens of Myanmar. The legacy in Myanmar goes back centuries. They are part of that country and they deserve to live in that country of their choice. Now, the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, since the crisis started, has turned a blind eye, and she's been done a great job, actually much better than anybody had anticipated, much better than I think she gets credit for allowing these refugees in. So she's in a very, very difficult situation because they simply do not have the resources and to even absorb those kinds of numbers and just to cater for them. And in some of those camps now, the disease is rife. People are literally starving. There's starvation, there's diarrhea and cholera and everything else spreading throughout those camps. But at the same time, we have to try to support the government of Bangladesh in their current situation as best as we can. And in terms of the policy of PTI, I have no idea. I worked on the campaign up until 2015, and that was the end of my tenure with them. I'm not aware of the government of Pakistan. But I can tell you this, of all the OIC countries, all the Muslim countries, only one has threatened to break ties with Myanmar, and that was the Maldives. No other country did anything apart from issue statements. The OIC issues lots of statements, and they do this principally to pacify their own population because it gets a lot of media coverage in their own countries, so they can demonstrate, that we're doing what we can. We met with the Secretary General, we met with this leader and that leader, we put pressure on them. But in reality, this is a non-issue. The Rohingya were described as the most persecuted minority in the world by the UN. They were also described as the most friendless people in the world. They literally have no friends anywhere, and this is the difficulty of their predicament. Yeah. Question at the back? Yeah.
Yes, for what her motivation is in terms of, being a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and now, you were arguing that supporters are trying to say that if she's under pressure, blah, blah, blah. So can you analyze what is her motivation? And then two, and I'm not sure if you shared this, the original ethnicity of the Rohingyas, or if they do, would this eliminate their whole ethnic group?
Okay, so two questions here about Aung San Suu Kyi and her position, and the second question about the Rohingya ethnicity. First of all, Aung San Suu Kyi has evolved from a peace campaigner to a full-time politician. She has now simply made a political calculation that the Rohingya issue is not worth utilising any political capital over. It is simply not worth antagonising the military and the extreme Buddhist clergy for this minority group who nobody cares about. So she made this calculation, and she has not only stayed silent, but she has actually provided cover for the military. She gave a speech just a couple of days ago in which she made some really bizarre claims. She said, first of all, that we have no idea why the Rohingya are leaving. We have no idea why the Rohingya are leaving. So she's either completely isolated and she doesn't know, which I really doubt, because she's clearly a very intelligent woman, or she's essentially just providing cover for the military. And she also said that any of these Rohingya want to come back, they're more than welcome to do so, as long as they can prove that they're from Myanmar. And I looked at the edict that she's referring to from 1993. The Rohingya have to present papers from the border, from passport stamps where they cross the border into Bangladesh. These are all refugees, remember? They don't have passports. They have to provide passport stamps. They have to provide evidence of where they lived, which has all been burnt down, and only then will they be permitted to come back. So they've set up these impossible loops that they have to go through. But I also believe, and I urge once again, I published a piece on this in Newsweek this morning about the Aung San Suu Kyi and why we were seduced by her. You know, one of the reasons why there was very little criticism of Aung San Suu Kyi is because, you see, we in the West, we like to have our heroes on a pedestal. We like to have our heroes untarnished. And the story of Aung San Suu Kyi is one of the most perfect stories you'd ever hear. She is the daughter of one of the founding generals of Myanmar. She was placed under house arrest by her father's former colleagues. Now she's out of prison. She's out of prison. You know, she's opening up a country. She was Oxford educated. She speaks in the Queen's English. She's got the Nobel Prize. You know, this is fantastic. This is the kind of thing you make Hollywood movies out of. Nobody wants to hear about her shortcomings. Nobody wants to hear about the shortcomings of Martin Luther King or Nelson Mandela or Mother Teresa, you know, or anybody else. We like to have our heroes pure and on a pedestal. When they speak like us, you know, they're going to go back to their own countries and fix it. Just like we had faith in Bashar al-Assad, who's educated in the West. You know, he speaks like us, he's one of us. And all these Saudi princes from Oxford that are educated in Oxford, no, they're going to go back to their countries and fix it. But they don't. You know, these people are just like them. Same with Saif al-Gaddafi, PhD from LSE. You know, he's one of those guys, he's going to reform his country. Aung San Suu Kyi, people put a lot of false faith in her. And I believe, and I've been told this by a number of people who actually met her, is that she actually believes what the military are doing. She actually believes that, look, these Rohingyas are all illegal immigrants and they should all go back to Bangladesh. And she has she's essentially a Buddhist supremacist. She's a Buddhist supremacist. She's a Burma Buddhist supremacist who believes that Myanmar is a Buddhist country with lots of ethnic minorities rather than a multi-ethnic country. So I don't believe she's going to do much, and I think the pressure on her is absolutely correct. There has to be much more pressure applied to her, because this idea that she doesn't control the military is certainly true, but she is still extremely influential. She's the moral conscience of that country, the most famous citizens of that country. And for her to say, oh, both sides are equally to blame, is the moral equivalence of saying both the Jews and the Nazis were to blame for the Holocaust. It was to say that both the blacks and the whites were to blame for apartheid South Africa. When you draw that moral equivalence, it is moral bankruptcy of the highest order.
So my other question
Yeah.
was about their ethnicity, and then what are the local people?
Yeah. So in terms of the ethnicity, yeah, so this idea about the ethnicity, yeah, even though I touched upon it, that these people are not from Bangladesh, they're actually indigenous, you know, Burmese, you know, in many respects that's also a red herring argument, because whether they're from Bangladesh or whether they're from Myanmar is completely irrelevant. The fact is they were born in Myanmar, they have history there, you know, their forefathers were from Myanmar, whether they were from Bangladesh or not is immaterial, and to make them stateless in such a fashion like 1982 is actually illegal under international law. So in many respects the argument of their origin is immaterial, even though I tried to demonstrate that, you know, it's a false accusation that is made against them. And what was the second part of your question?
What are the local?
Okay, so the locals, you know, I have two friends who are journalists in Myanmar, and it was one of the questions I asked them is, you know, what is the attitude of the locals? First of all, many of the locals, and this is before the current crisis, simply had no idea what was going on with the Rohingya in terms of the concentration camps and the persecution. And secondly, many of them have actually bought into the fact, into the reality, into the lie that they are all illegal Bengali immigrants that should go back to their own country. Yeah, gentleman in the back.
Are there any historical precedents for repatriation once the whole population has been moved out?
Not in a situation like this, because, like I said, this is a systematic and organised campaign. This is not just people fleeing a war. This is, if you look at the actual accounts of the Rohingya, this has been organised. And I actually wrote a piece last year and saying that the Myanmar military is preparing for a large offensive. And when General Min Aung Hlaing, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, was visiting Europe, he visited Austria and Germany to buy armaments, to buy weapons. And I wrote to both of the ambassadors, and I published my letter online, it's on Huffington Post. This is a May warning that the Myanmar military is now preparing for a large ethnic cleansing operation. Yeah, so this has been in preparation for a long time. People were aware of this, and the Myanmar military is operating in such a fashion that they essentially attack a village, and they drive all the people out, then the extreme Buddhist vigilantes and the police forces come in and burn the village down. And now we have 420,000 Rohingya over the border. What they have started to do is mind the border. They have mined the border to make sure that none of these people come back. Yeah, so this is a systematic campaign organised to ethnically cleanse them out of the country and make sure that none of them come back.
So realistically, what would you posit as a solution?
Well, the solution is very difficult. You know, I don't claim to have a solution, but I think the most immediate thing has to be some sort of penalty on Myanmar. There has to be, you know, in March of this year, the UN passed a very strong resolution asking for a full-scale Human Rights Commission inquiry, which Myanmar just ignored. And so there has to be some sort of sanction, has to be some sort of penalty, first of all, against the Myanmar authorities.
I understand how to punish it.
Yeah.
My question is, what would you be positing to happen? And I can understand what the punishment.
Yeah, well, in terms of what needs to happen now is to fix the situation is that the Rohingya have to be repatriated back into their country, and if not, then there has to be some sort of penalty against Myanmar for not doing so. Yeah.
How many Rohingyas are left in the country?
Well, the estimates are that there's various numbers, but I estimate that there's about 40% of them have been ethnically cleansed in the last 3 weeks. So and it's slowed down only because of the monsoon. So in the current trajectory, like I said, we probably will see the entire population being ethnically cleansed before the end of the year.
What American Muslims can do?
We could lobby our representatives and make sure that they're fully aware of what's happening, and if nothing else, to make sure that the mechanisms are in place to bring those people that are behind this crime, and all their names are known, to bring them to justice. And secondly, to help as much as possibly can for those that are in Bangladesh, for the Rohingyas, of course. They're living in real, I've seen the videos and pictures, I'm sure some of you have as well, that the conditions they're in are not even fit for animals. It really is. And some of them don't even have cover. They're literally just in forests and woods and eating grass.
Is Bangladesh accepting the relief work?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, they're accepting it as best as they can, but 420,000 people is a lot of people, in 3 weeks. This is the largest refugee crisis, I think, in recent memory.
If all the relief organizations and Muslim relief organizations, they can direct all their resources right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of Muslim organisations, relief organisations I'm aware of that are operating on the ground and doing good work. But like I said, 420,000 people is a lot of people, and they're still coming. 1,000 an hour, 1,000 people an hour approximately are crossing into Bangladesh.
You have some good connections over there in Bangladesh right now?
The organisations that you're aware of, Islamic Relief, Muslim Aid, the ones that are operating here, Human Appeal International, I'm aware they're all doing very, very good work. So you're more than welcome to go through them.
Is there allowed to work inside Myanmar?
No, they're not allowed to work. In Myanmar, they're held in concentration camps. They can't work, they can't have children, they can't get married. They have to have a license for all of those things in Myanmar. This was before the current crisis, so in the current crisis, and in Bangladesh, they're not permitted to work either, because the Bangladeshi government does not want them to be absorbed into the population. In fact, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh passed an edict to say that it is forbidden for a Rohingya to get into a vehicle. So any vehicle, a rickshaw, motorcycle, bus, taxi, ambulance, for them to enter into a vehicle is actually illegal, because they do not want them to disappear into the population. They want to keep them confined to that particular area in the hope that some sort of agreement can be reached and they can repatriate them all. Okay, go ahead.
So, can't we put pressure on our governments to accept them over here, like to have, refugees come to the West, or perhaps put pressure on other Muslim countries to accept them as refugees? Because clearly, until they are safe in their own country, it's not all right for them to be there. And I think, putting sanctions on the government or the Myanmar government and things of that nature is a long shot. But for the time being, since they're suffering so much persecution, don't you think it's the duty of other countries to accept them and just absorb them? And the other thing I wanted to say is that I think that, as a student, I was a massive supporter of Aung San Suu Kyi, but I think that BBC has been slamming her. The whole intellectual world has sort of deluded, and they want to take away her peace prize. So I don't think she has that kind of clout with the West as she did, and with the the intelligentsia as she did when she was a prisoner, and then when she just first come into power. I think the only people who are alluded by her are the people. I mean, who are who think she's wonderful is her own people, but I don't think she has that clout.
Yeah. So first of all, in terms of the refugees, no Muslim country wants to take the Rohingya refugees because they literally are the lowest of the low in terms of refugee camp. They're not like Syrian refugees who are generally very well educated, very entrepreneurial, and they contribute significantly wherever they go. Germany took in 1 million Syrians for that particular reason because they know this will be the next generation of workforce for their country. The Rohingya are not like that. Within Myanmar itself, they had severe restrictions on their education, so there's not many educated amongst them, and they're either fishermen, farmers, labourers, or rickshaw pullers or something like that. So countries like Malaysia and Thailand, Cambodia, Pakistan, Pakistan's got ghettos of Rohingya refugees, and they treated very badly. Even Saudi Arabia has taken a huge, there's many Rohingya there. They're treated very badly. None of the countries want the Rohingya refugees. So you can lobby these Muslim countries, but most of these countries in that entire region are overpopulated themselves. And they have no need for people of that kind of category. So that makes it much more difficult. In terms of Aung San Suu Kyi, much of her political capital does come from her international position, and there's been immense pressure put on her. But despite that, she is where like I said, she's made a calculation. She has spent her entire life, and she went through immense sacrifice to get to where she is today. She was under house arrest for decades. Her husband died when she was under house arrest. She couldn't even go to his funeral, but she couldn't see her children. Now she is exactly where she wants to be. She's not willing to give that up. She is not going to give that up for this minority group. She is where she is. She wants to consolidate her position, wants to ensure that she's in a position of power. So for her, it's a critical calculation. It's purely a political calculation that this Rohingya minority is simply not worth antagonising the military and the Buddhist clergy who wield considerable influence in that country.
I have one other question. Is there Islamic extremism in those parts? Because she claims that there is.
Yeah.
And there are other organizations that have claimed that there are Islamic extremists that are trying to protect the Rohingyas. Is that true?
Okay, so when Aung San Suu Kyi came to power, she set up, like I said, a number of commissions to look at not just the Rohingya situation, but also to look at the civil war. She set up a commission called the Ponglong II, and that was to examine the civil wars in the country. Almost every ethnic group in Myanmar has been at war with the central government since its independence. The Kachin, the Shin, the Chan, all of them have been at war. The Rohingya were not included in this discussion, were not included in this convention, because the Rohingya were considered to be a non-violent organisation that did not have a militant wing. Now this is very important. They did not have a militant wing, so they were not included in these discussions of negotiations with the civil war. It was only recently, on the 25th of August, we've seen this new organisation called the ARSA, the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, that undertook an attack that left a dozen security officials dead. And so the government claims, the military claims, we're responding to that. We're responding to that. But obviously the action is completely disproportionate to what the actual threat is, first of all. And secondly, ARSA is a relatively new organisation. They're not very well equipped. I've seen their videos. You watch their videos, and it's literally a handful of guys with Kalashnikovs. And when these militants make their videos in which they've all got their balaclavas on and they read the statement, and there's always guys standing with the rocket launchers and they like to demonstrate strength, they like to demonstrate their firepower. In their videos, they have 3-4 guys with Kalashnikovs, and the rest of them are holding bamboo sticks. This is the extent of their power, and they're all bare feet, and they're all they do not pose a significant threat. The government, the authorities in Myanmar have been waiting for this opportunity to lash out at the Rohingya and to demonstrate to the world that look, here is the threat from Islamic extremism that we're all experiencing, and we're just trying to clamp down on them. So I don't believe, and even the actual ARSA, the leaders, they're not actually from Myanmar. Most of them are actually Saudi and Pakistani. They've actually spent the Rohingya origin, but have spent time in those countries. Say again? Turkey is probably the only Muslim country I think that's actually done anything positive. Like just today, I actually spoke to one of my colleagues who's been lobbying in the UN, and she's saying Turkey has been the only country that's been receptive, and no other, I'm not going to mention names, but no other Muslim country has been receptive at all to any of the kind of efforts and lobbying efforts that they're making. It's only been Turkey. Yeah.
My question is, as we know, UN is not in 40 years. Why don't we mobilize Muslim to mobilize and threaten?
Well, I don't have the authority to mobilize and threaten mobilize these countries. If I did, I would consider it. I don't have any authority or influence over the Saudi military or the Pakistani military or anybody else. You'll have to take it up with those individual countries. But like I said, I have friends who have been meeting with those representatives, and they've shown almost zero interest in this issue. They might make public statements, but in private, they have shown zero interest in this topic. Like I said, no country has threatened to cut ties with Myanmar except the Maldives. That tells you exactly where the Muslim world stands.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's a big talk in India about deportation of refugees, of almost 40,000 residents, 15,000 having the permits. Right? What's the take of UN on that?
I don't think the UN has even responded to that. Prime Minister Modi visited Myanmar recently, and I think he got emboldened after he visited there, and now he wants to deport all the Rohingyas that are in India under the pretext that these people are a threat. They are now a threat because they have been radicalized with the current situation. So, but where is he going to deport them to? There's nowhere for them literally to go. They really are a completely stateless people. It's a real unique situation.
So there are about 1.5 million of them, right?
Yeah, well, it depends. 1.1 to 2 million. The estimates vary very widely.
Which is not a high number actually in terms of population. So given repatriation of them is also going to be not a solution. Since 80% of the population does not like them. And they will be always an oppressed minority. So the solution for the think tanks is to kind of repatriate them to different countries,
Maybe so, but maybe that is the best solution, but that is not what the Rohingya want. They want to live in their own country, the country of their ancestors and the country of their forefathers.
That leads to more extremism. That's where ARSA came into existence. Potentially, Myanmar might claim that these are terrorists. That's a policy, right? Indian government is also kind of thinking that terrorism. So,
the solution is not easy, and I don't claim to have one. But the fact is, the Rohingya want to live in the country of their forefathers, and I believe that they should.
The pictures what you have shown of refugee camps in Bangladesh are this one. So is Bangladesh willing to make them better?
Well, they claim to be building new camps. How good they will be, I have no idea, but I don't anticipate there to be anything luxurious at all. They're probably just shelters. They literally just be shelters.
At least like UN.
Oh no, I doubt that. I think they will literally just be shelters, bamboo shelters. Nothing beyond that. Go ahead, Maria.
Well, I was just going to say, I think we're all focused on what the solution is. Like right now, you're stating an alternative. You can't really argue with a group of people that they should not go back to the country that they feel that they have ties to. You can't decide that for another group
But the
of
thing
people.
is, it's the same situation like
Yeah, but
Israel
let me
and
finish.
Palestine.
Let me finish. So what I was saying is that that though that's ideally the situation where we want them to go back to their place, and we don't have a solution in place, there's no other Muslim countries taking them in. I think our advocacy has to start with how do we better the conditions of their livelihood right now.
Right now, right?
Because if they cannot read, if they do not have jobs, if they are not educated, they cannot self-sustain themselves. So really, I think our advocacy has to be twofold. It has to be number one, and I want you to speak about this, Azim, if you can, the issue of genocide and ethnic cleansing and the two terms and what they actually mean under international law. So first we have to make very clear that we understand stand and put a face on the Rohingya for the international community. We make them human. You know, we normalize who they are. We talk about the fact that they're standing in feces with us. So that should not be a standard that any country should accept. And then after that, we talk about how do we better the conditions for the kids, you know, basic medical care and the adults, and then we talk about livelihood and education. A lot of these refugee camps, even that were serving the Syrians, had different types of trainings and things like that for individuals, you know? So just having that discussion to start with is probably, I think, a better way to start into this discussion with our legislators. Correct. To better the livelihood of humans so we can humanize them, and then we also have this other argument, right? We don't want to get lost in this level only, and then leave them in standing in feces, right?
Good point. But the thing is, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh instructed the auto rickshaw drivers, not even treat them. How you can convince the leadership of
So
Bangladesh?
that goes into the idea of humanizing people. How do you not let them
Let me just address Maria's point about ethnic cleansing and genocide, and then we'll wrap up here. So the UN has called this ethnic cleansing. The Secretary General has said that look, there is no better term for this than ethnic cleansing. The UN Human Rights Commissioner has said that this is textbook ethnic cleansing. They will not use the word genocide. Yeah, genocide has many definitions. Yeah, this has been classified, like my book calls it Myanmar's hidden genocide. Many legal experts around the globe have called it a genocide. Yale University, for example, called it a genocide. Queen Mary University called it a genocide. Human Rights Watch called it a genocide. But the UN will not call it a genocide because once they classify something as a genocide, it automatically triggers the Security Council to take a particular course of action under the Genocide Convention, which none of them want to do. So even Rwanda, 850,000 people were hacked to death within a matter of weeks, and it was not classified as a genocide because they didn't want it to be classified as a genocide because none of them wanted to take any action. So I don't anticipate, you can argue about the nomenclature of whether it is a genocide, whether it meets the definition or not. I believe it does. That the systematic elimination of a particular ethnic group, that I believe it meets that category. There's multiple definitions, but it won't be. You won't hear that word genocide on any politician's lips at all. Yeah. So should wrap it up now.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring everyone's attention. I think the people in the back can get this, but I can maybe, you can email it out to the listserv at CRGC and IFS. But there's two documents that you have that have a call to action, and they have the numbers of the Secretary General of the UN for these countries, Muslim countries. So I think two things that we want to talk about is the issue of genocide, right? Talking about the term genocide. And then the other thing is talking about the conditions of the Rohingyas in the concentration camps. In the concentration camps, and also in these different countries. I think this is a perfect example of the fact that they can't get into vehicles. Because that's how it's going to be even if you send them to different countries, right? People are going to treat them like this. So really, I think we have to have those two discussions in mind when you call. And there's a list of steps that you can also take that are on this document. This was recommended by the Burma Task Force. I'm sure you all have heard of them. They're pretty active in Chicago. They're, I think, spearheaded by Malik Mujahid. So, but take a look at that, and then I think that, I think we can wrap it up.
I just had a quick question, just more tactical in terms of how do you get the aid if you wanted to donate something? Logistically, how does the aid get to the people there?
Well, like I said, there's a number of organisations that are working on the ground. You're familiar with most of them. Many of them have offices here in Chicago. Human Appeal International, Islamic Relief, Muslim Hands, Muslim Aid, and they're all doing, as far as I know, excellent work on the ground. So there's no difficulty, I think, of actually getting there. All of them have offices there. Some of them have got offices in Bangladesh for a long time, and so they have representatives on the ground that are doing fantastic work, and we should definitely try to support them.
And the administration doesn't restrict that over there?
Not as far as I know. I think they've all had good relations, and I'm in touch with a lot of them actually on a regular basis, and I know they're doing excellent work on the ground.
Thank you.
One last question. Speaking for advocacy, in terms of
I think the recommendations that Maria articulated are some, yeah, this is going to happen, yeah, and it will happen again. This idea of never again, this is part of the human condition, and there's so many interests at play here which I didn't even touch upon about China and other countries that are actually, the tug of war between the US and China in terms of control over that part of the world. I didn't even touch upon. This will happen again, and it'll happen again and again. Yeah, so there's no doubt that we should become despaired, because it's happened many things in my lifetime. Yeah, I remember when Bosnia happened, I remember when Rwanda happened, and it will happen again. And we just have to make sure that every time it does happen, that we don't lose heart, and we continue to work.
I'm just gonna hand it to Imran to talk about Imana, because there's a question about donation.
First of all, wonderful talk. I just wanted to comment. I'm a member of Imana, which does medical relief work throughout the world. And one of the problems that we've actually had in Bangladesh, and I don't know, I think if you can add to this, but the government has actually a complete lockdown on all foreign aid workers entering Bangladesh right now. So Imana is also a charter member of FEMA, which is the Federation of Islamic Medical Associations of the world. There's 29 of us organizations. And right now they're not letting anyone in, and aid workers are being imprisoned. So if there are organizations that are getting in, that'd be good information to have. We know that the Malaysian government is pressuring Bangladesh to set up a field hospital that we have ready to go, and there's 26 NGOs that are literally ready to go. So Imana, our organization, we haven't actually collected the funds yet because we can't disperse them, but we're hoping that once this field hospital is set up, equivalent to like a level 2 trauma center, that we'd all be allowed in. But as far as I know, as of now, most of the organizations have been totally blocked from entering Bangladesh due to political reasons. So I don't know if that was going to change or not, or if you have any insight into that.
I'll just respond. Yeah, it's okay. I just responded that, like I said, I'm in touch with people almost on a daily basis, and that part of the world, like, I think, as you can all appreciate, a lot of it comes down to connections. Yeah, and I know people that are now working with some of these organisations, and like, I'm going to make a trip out there very shortly, and they told me exactly who I need to meet, who you need to bring, who you need to speak to, etc. And that's how it works. Yeah, so I'm not sure these organisations really know the lay of the land. Yeah, some of the more experienced ones, they are operating in the camps. I get video footage from them on a regular basis, and and they do great work. I think maybe some of the newer ones may not understand the mechanisms by which you have to operate in that part of the world, but the more established ones are definitely out there and doing great work.
My name is Abdullah Mitchell. I'm with the Council of Islamic Organizations of Greater Chicago. And I want to call everybody's attention that tomorrow, I don't know if it was announced earlier, I didn't get here at the beginning, I apologize for that. But nonetheless, tomorrow at 1 o'clock, there will be a demonstration for the Rohingya, sponsored by the Rohingya Cultural Center. The Cultural Center is located at 2740 West Devon in Chicago. It is crucial that we continue to come out and support these efforts. There was a rally held last week. For whatever reason, there was a lot of people that came out, but it didn't fill the plaza. We need to, if we're talking about bringing about a change, it's going to be important that all of you come out and show that support. The other thing, and once again, I'm sorry, it's at 1 o'clock. It's called the Plaza of the Americas. That's right across from the Wrigley Building on Michigan, just north of Wacker Drive. And I said, this is an effort sponsored by the Rohingya Cultural Center here in Chicago. The other thing is, in terms of your want to contribute, and I understand the point that you're making about how it's difficult to get money in, but when you talk to the people at the center, the brothers and sisters at the center, what they say, they have their ways. Now, it doesn't meet maybe regulatory standards in terms of this is approved agency, but I think it's important to remember there are people dying, raped, burned, and it's sad, and I'm not taking issue with any of the points that were raised, but it's really sad when you consider this is happening and then we're saying nothing else can be done. I don't have any answers, and Dr. Ibrahim didn't give you answers, but collectively, if we put our minds together and continue to raise the voices, inshallah, there will be a solution to the problem. And that's what I'm asking you today. Even come out tomorrow and then visit the Rohingya Cultural Center. They can offer you some solutions that maybe in the short term can help deal with some of the suffering that they're undergoing. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Okay, with that, we'll end tonight's program. We want to thank Dr. Ibrahim for his presentation and the invaluable information he shared with us. But before we end, just one request. Maybe we can't physically do something, but the first thing we can do is make dua. So please start with that. Let's just first make dua, because you never know whose prayer will be accepted, and if Allah chooses some miracle to happen, maybe it will. Inshallah. But thank you so much, Dr. Ibrahim. Thank you so much to everybody that came. Inshallah, this was a fruitful evening.